at this time, put your hands together for Joe Strickland.
Thank you, sir. Just to the gentleman from Saskatchewan, there is a public company called the Organic Green Dutchman that is claim to fame is they're creating organic cannabis, and they've been able to raise a lot of capital on Bay Street just by virtue of being an organic concept. Thank you everyone for having me. It's been a fantastic conference. I've learned so much from the doctors to who I call the Mo Norman of traditional medicine. If you're familiar with golf, there was a Canadian legend named Mo Norman who didn't get the credit he deserved until the end of his career, and I think Dr. Hank is that type of person as well. Chief, elders, council members, you guys are putting on a wonderful, wonderful conference here, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I did go to business school and was a bond trader on Wall Street in New York, and decided I didn't like that so much and wanted to get into business. So I've been investing in companies and running companies from time to time as part of my investments over the last 20 years. The biggest deal I did was probably a biomass operation in Liberia, West Africa, where we went in, turned a bunch of acres of dead rubber trees into biomass and sold them to Italians, and they use that to make electricity out of it. So I lived in Liberia, West Africa for about 3 years and did all kinds of work over there and learned a lot about life by living in the bush in Africa. So currently I am on the board of the Canadian Securities Exchange, and I'm also an investor in that company. It is the stock exchange in Toronto that has listed several hundred cannabis companies, and it's kind of the vortex of where all the capital raising and other activities are going on right now in the cannabis space from the capital markets perspective. So as a result of that position, I see all kinds of concepts, business models, meet lots of entrepreneurs, meet lots of people that are involved in the cannabis business, and as well I have great relationships with people that provide the capital to those companies, which, as you well know, is the lifeblood of a company going forward. So that'll sort of give you some background to inform you on how we're looking at this wonderful opportunity and evolving First Nations. I started, when I came back from Africa about 5 years ago, I started a business with a Indigenous partner named Jake Linklater. Jake is a member of the Chippewas of Cape Croker, and we started a business called Long North Capital. Jake caught my attention because he was instrumental in helping two communities, the Saugeen First Nation and his own community, get a significant stake in a transmission line that flows from the Bruce Nuclear Power Plant down to Toronto. And they managed to access capital on Bay Street. They raised about $70 million for it, and as a result, every single year, his community benefits quite substantially from that relationship. So I got intrigued by that, so I started a business with Jake, and since then we've been working mainly in Ontario, but we've now got a project in Manitoba, but mainly in Ontario with chiefs and councils, and only chiefs and councils. We don't work for corporations. And we've had some success there as well. Last year we managed to get, it's going to add up to about $65 million over the next 28 years for a community that in 1996 had a hydroelectric project put in one of their rivers, and they were promised the sun, the moon, and the stars, and a lot of money, and none of that happened. The project actually did some damage to the river, and they didn't get any money. So I'm not a lawyer, but we were able to negotiate a very substantial settlement, which will be a couple $1 million a year for the next 28 years for this First Nation with the Ontario government. So we do all kinds of interesting things, and through that business, we got asked by a First Nation who was being bombarded with proposals on cannabis. Well, what should we do to get into this space? So WeSag was born as a result of that with the Saugeen First Nation, which is located in northern southwest Ontario. So if you will indulge me, I'll walk through WeSag with you and invite you to ask questions at any time. And we're here to create an inclusive company for any First Nation or any Indigenous entrepreneurs that want to participate. We've got structures and concepts that we think are relevant to everything. So WeSag was started about 2.5 years ago, and it's been very carefully doing a lot of things. So here we go. Is to create safe, effective, affordable cannabis products and services. That means we want to help First Nations communities responsibly and effectively reap the economic benefits of legalized cannabis, while also ensuring that public health issues are proactively dealt with. Our goal is to unite interested First Nations and Indigenous entrepreneurs to create a competitive, top 5 in the world, authentic, Indigenous, global cannabis brand. I wanted to put top 3 up there, but my partners wouldn't let me. WeSag will do this by innovative commercial structures and arrangements that, properly executed, will create tremendous value and share it fairly between WeSag and our First Nations business partners and Indigenous entrepreneurs. By that I mean we're trying to create equity value, long-term equity value, so that you actually have something. It's not about the sugar rush of generating cash today. That'll be a big component of the value as you go forward. But at the end of the day, if you're going to compete globally, you have to do it above board, transparently, and you have to create equity value. So that's what our mission is to do. We're going to achieve the scale necessary to compete globally by building all of the business services global companies require into our WeSag ecosystem, including access to capital. Curating products from LPs in the early years, and then growing select strains under our own licenses on reserves, will fill the demand for cannabis that we create with our service and unique sales channels. So we started with safety first. We spent a long time talking to chiefs and healthcare professionals, so we started with safety first. So you'll see on your desk, I left a press release out that we announced yesterday. We're actually starting to go public with what we're doing. Cannabis is a fascinating plant, as Dr. John just explained so eloquently. And the products that come from it are very complex. And they create widely divergent impacts on individual users depending on what plant is used, how it is consumed, how much of it is consumed, and what other things it is being consumed with, as well as that individual's health. WeSag believes that extra care must be taken when potentially authorizing cannabis for a user. Extra care must be taken when selecting the strain of cannabis for a user. And extra care should be available to a user as they use cannabis to ensure the user a safe and effective experience. I bought cannabis at dispensaries in Toronto, as market research, of course. And typically you go in and you'll get a young person who's very earnest, and they'll say to you things like, well, I smoked this last night and it gave me a good buzz. We don't see that as being a sustainable way forward for people who are actually serious about medical cannabis, for example, as a way to actually improve health outcomes. So we've taken those experiences and built them into our WeSag offering going forward. So as I said, we listen to chiefs, leaders, healthcare professionals who said start with medical cannabis, but make sure that you bring safe product that are used effectively. So we're working with LPs to deliver safe products and hiring Indigenous nurses to make sure they are used effectively through our personal cannabis health services program. By that I mean, we've let them design the program. They're designing it in a holistic health way. We've told them that we're not in the business of selling pot to stoners. It's just not going to be that way. We have given them carte blanche, really, to build an effective protocol, and they're doing a wonderful job. They built a health survey that we're going to launch very shortly to help baseline the case for what patients are really like on Indigenous reserves. Our goal in the next 2 years is to have about 120 to 150 nurses out there in Indigenous communities, and also serving Indigenous people in the urban areas in which they congregate. So we believe in having embedded nurses out there in the community. So our plan is to have them work with patients who are buying cannabis from us, to work with them for at least 2 years, so that they can measure if it's working, how it's working, etc., and also collect data in an anonymized way, of course, done properly and professionally, because we learned by talking to the federal government, who last year spent $53 million on cannabis for veterans, that they have no information. They don't know whether it's working. They don't know whether people are having good outcomes. They just know that They had 7,300 veterans last year buy cannabis, and they paid for it. So here's what we've been up to for the last 18 months. I just mentioned we've got our on and off reserve National Health Services Bureau developed, and it's being implemented with Indigenous nurses. We call that an effective use of cannabis. Our baseline survey is drafted. We've been working with people that actually do clinical studies and things like that because we want it to be highly effective. We do have cannabis supply and cooperation agreements in place with LPs. We believe that because the government says they're creating safe product, and it's incredibly important to us that we get safe product. We're working with the federal government and LPs to make cannabis affordable for Indigenous people. By that, I mean you'll hear a lot of rumor about the NIHB program and other things like that. We actually have had an effective lobbying program with the Prime Minister's office, the Privy Council's office, Health Canada, and a bunch of other places where we're talking to them about what they ought to do to help make cannabis affordable for Indigenous people. We're staffing our business services units to achieve scale and compete globally. We've hired 2 branding agencies, and we've got our brand camps underway. I want you to understand that to compete globally, this costs money. So we've committed at least $300 so far just to launch our brand. We're not doing this in a small way. And we're onboarding First Nations who are joining WESAG. Like I said, Saugeen is a founding partner of WESAG. We've got a few other Ontario-based First Nations on board, and now we're opening our story up to people across the country, chiefs, councils, Indigenous entrepreneurs, and we're open to discussions with anybody who wants to join our platform. We think it's important to work with chiefs, councils, and other policymakers to, they don't let me out to do these very often. We're working with chiefs, band councils, and communities to develop what we call harmonized regulations and policies for on-reserve retail that's in line with federal and provincial laws and community preferences. By that, I mean we'll make specific agreements to grow on reserve and distribute on and off reserve, and to benefit in the value WESAG Corporation helps create. We have our licensed producer applications in the queue at Health Canada for both indoor and outdoor grow situations, which is now unlicensed, on reserve. We have so far 1,050 acres dedicated to WESAG now, and we're planning to grow outdoors in the summer of 2019. Indoor will be grown after that, but based on demand, data, and facts. We're working with people to understand, what strains will grow outdoors, and then we want to collect data that will say, here's what our customers are using, and we'll grow that. We're negotiating preferential distribution strategies with provincial governments for off-reserve adult use sales. By that I mean, we're asking the government to level the playing field, simply. First Nations have access to capital issues with the chattel laws and different things like that. So the way to launch value was to actually go out and create distribution channels that only First Nations and not LPs can access. And through that, we've been successful in talking to financiers and other people like that to show them that there's a way to grow this in a different way than the licensed producers who are growing, which has basically been, put 1 million square feet up and call yourself a licensed producer. So we're taking a completely different approach to that we believe works better given the realities of working on reserves. Product curation and development team is being staffed. We've hired somebody that's got pharma-grade medical experience who will help develop the next generation of products. As you well know, there's a stigma attached to smoking, and Dr. Hank's already making his own pills, and there's all kinds of different modalities of product that are coming, so we're focused on the long term. Different ways than just dry bud, secondary products, tertiary products, all those different things are what we're really focused on because we're going to create a long-term successful global brand. Our cultivation team is being recruited. There's a shake-up going on in the licensed producer community, so there's people available, and we're hiring people to help us grow. We were waiting for people to get fired as the consolidation comes, and now it's happening. And we're papering a binding agreement with the University of Guelph where WSAG, Saugeen First Nation, and the University of Guelph are creating a cannabis center of excellence in Ontario, and we're going to be a founding partner of that, which we're quite proud of because it will help us marry the academia that you saw, the brilliance of Dr. Salsky. There's similar teams at the University of Guelph, which is Ontario's agricultural university, so we're working with them and we're quite proud of winning that. And finally, we're recruiting for the WSAG Special Advisory Council. It's being led by someone who's well known across the country in Indigenous circles who rolls up his sleeves and does the work. And again, we've given him carte blanche to select his team so that he will have people that will ensure the authenticity of the WSAG brand going forward. So we're going to put some of that just after the AFN convention for privacy reasons for this leader. So how does Saugeen participate in cannabis with WSAG? One, we're going to grow cannabis indoor and outdoor with licenses from Health Canada. We have 750 acres on their reserve for growing and housing all other buildings. Strains will be selected based on actual data. We will invest in proven technologies to optimize our grows. Product Development Center for new cannabis products, including an FDA-approved personal product and secondary tertiary products like edibles, drinks, etc. We need to ensure safety. We need to ensure that we know what's in these things. We need to ensure transparency to consumers. We're competing as a global brand trying to create equity values. We need to do all these things. We can't do it on a bootleg basis. Extraction facilities for oils and other value-add processing technologies where we grow, mainly for the outdoor cannabis, which the industry currently believes must be processed, although if you start to see some of the things that Dr. Selsky's presenting, things are probably going to change in that area too. Now we're going to have our own packaging facilities to package WSAG branding products, lots of training, on-reserve health services, and for medical cannabis, as I described, with Indigenous nurses, and on-reserve sales, off-reserve sales of adult products. Like I said, we're working hard with provincial agencies to create these harmonized platforms. What it takes to compete. Relationship management, contract supply with licensed producers. Like a co-op, buying power as a group, WSAG will negotiate all relationships with LPs on behalf of our First Nation partners. The relationships will include supplying genetics, products under our brands, licensing support, growing support, etc. So, licensed producers have agreed to license the WSAG brand and package package product for us in this interim period. Number two, brand creation, development, and expansion management. Again, we'll have a family of medical products and a family of adult use products, all delivered through distribution channels we control, ultimately exporting the Indigenous products to represent First Nations globally. So, a lot of companies are focusing on exports. There's no reason why if we create a proper brand that's considered safe and effective and has a First Nations element to it, we actually think we can command a premium in markets around the world, particularly Europe. Harmonized compliance, I mentioned that before. All aspects of operations comply with the rules and regs made by the feds, provinces, and importantly, First Nations. We do my partners are Indigenous. We fully respect jurisdiction, sovereignty, all those things, and believe that First Nations need to drive the bus on this. This is a First Nations company that is driving the bus, but it's harmonizing itself with the bigger world so that it can actually create equity value and long-term sustainable value. Administrative and contract services, again, it's all about contracts, so applying for license, moving products, filing reports to stay within the system. Finance and access to capital, we know all the investors, investment banks, lenders, all entities who finance CapEx and working capital needs. WSAG will help ensure the liquidity and flow of funds inside WSAG and between our value and supply chain partners, including First Nations. Government relations. Sadly, this is a big part of what we have to do. The government is all over this industry. They aren't doing a good job of it yet. They'll admit candidly that they're not doing a good job of it and that they probably have rushed things and haven't thought things through, particularly when it comes to First Nations. But they're catching up slowly but surely. We have hired 2 lobbying firms and a public relations firm, and you will see a series of announcements coming out of WSAG in the next 60 days that will help try to position extra special value for Indigenous entrepreneurs, First Nations, and ways that we are going to try to keep the LPs out of certain situations so that First Nations companies can grow value. All First Nation companies, not just WeSeg. Public relations, I mentioned that. Special Indigenous advisors. Again, elders, youth, thought leaders will be there to represent and make sure that we keep WeSeg indigenously authentic. We do not want to be expropriators of culture. We want to run this business with true intention and make sure that it grows into a global brand that fussy consumers like millennials will understand that we're creating something that's true and has the real support of the First Nation communities across Canada. Product curation, again, we talked about that. Product development. Our 5-year plan calls for $20 million to go into that budget line. So product development to get something through a FDA type process to make it very, very sophisticated and control the dosage and do all those things with some studies. Those things take money, and you need to be a big company with lots of capital to do those sort of things. We're going to do that. Store management, again, we've seen some great examples of people running retail outlets for cannabis. We're going to have store management. We're talking to a bunch of people who have great experience in this, and we're going to create some interesting stores. Logistics, huge part of the equation, moving product, moving money, moving shelves, all kinds of different things there. Cultivation, again, working with academic institutions, LPs, and others to ensure that for any growing system, we have the right optimized solution, whether it's indoor or outdoor. Export management, intellectual property, sales and marketing, human capital training. All of these things aren't really, if you want to create scale, within the scope of a small business. You need to do these things in a serious, big way, and that's what we're going to do. Consider these as kind of business services that will be within the WeSeg ecosystem that we're going to manage. Cultivation strategy. Like I said, there's this gap right now where we were actually pretty helpful in getting the federal government to acknowledge that they should include outdoor grows in their law that came out last year, 36 or whatever. And because they've gone silent on outdoor grows, but we knew that as First Nations it would be a huge advantage for First Nations to be able to grow outdoors. So we worked very hard to get that in the legislation. We're teaming with Guelph, I mentioned that. We're going to plant outdoor cannabis in the spring and summer of 2019. We are in the LPQ and talking to them on a regular basis. The target for outdoor grows is the secondary and tertiary products that are coming. As Dr. Yan sort of gave you a highlight of the economic system, I take a different approach to it. Why did Constellation Brands invest $5 billion in Canopy? The answer is because they're looking down the road. They're looking to these secondary and tertiary products that are going to be widely consumed rather than just the dry cannabis. So we've taken a longer term approach on that, and we think that outdoor grow is going to be a very, very, very viable strategy for First Nations going forward, and we're interested in talking to anybody that wants to grow outdoors. The bottom line is that WeSeg will have a nationally distributed network for growing cannabis indoors and outdoors on reserves. Multiple ways First Nations benefit. Safe, effective, affordable medical cannabis products for Indigenous patients because of the 2-year program with Indigenous nurses. Again, we see medical cannabis being attached to product. We attach to services. We think that nurses, Indigenous nurses in particular, are going to be an integral part of making sure that people have a safe and effective experience with cannabis. We don't think that the relationship stops with dispensing. We think it finishes never. It just keeps running and running and running, but we're promising people that will work at least 2 years with a patient and an Indigenous nurse, but I'm sure it'll last a lot longer than that. We're also going to work at friendship centers and other venues where Indigenous people collect, and there's already healthcare services established there. So we've got a real program developing there. We've hired a bunch of nurses, and we'll keep announcing what we're doing with our nurses as we go forward. We have definitely got unique off-reserve adult product sales strategies that will financially benefit communities. We'll discuss those with any First Nation under an NDA. Strategies for on-reserve adult sales. We have strategy to migrate what they're calling illicit cannabis stores to the harmonized system. We have standalone cannabis stores, and we have a store within a store concept. We're going to grow outdoors, then indoors, and the First Nation will benefit from that. We pay a royalty back, plus there's jobs, plus there's equity ownership in the company. There's a lot of ways that First Nations benefit on that. And they'll get included in the global Indigenous company we're trying to develop. And if you had 1% of Canopy today, it'd be worth $100 million. So owning part of a company that has equity value is, in our view, a substantial value proposition for First Nation. Our team is growing every day. Jake Linkletter, myself, Saugeen, we've got other First Nations that we're going to announce over time as we get into our AFN strategy. We've got an independent board of directors, elders, and Chief Isidore Days joined us as a policy advisor, and his team came along as well. We've got Juanita Rickard, who's on the board of directors of the Indigenous Nurses Association, and she's recruiting and hiring nurses as we speak. And those are the rest of our teams. Cannabis 1.5 is an interesting one. They're a compliance company that I would recommend to anybody who's going to grow product. They sort of give you an A to Z on being GMP qualified and things like that. So there's a good part of it. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, once again, if you could put your hands together for Mr. George Strickland.